Good evening. Today is Tuesday, January 25th, 2022, and this is a special 84th episode of New Paradigms. I'm your host, Sargis Sangari. My honored guest today is Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Shaffer, U.S. Army retired, the president of the London Center for Policy Research, a New York Times bestselling author, and a Central Intelligence Agency trained intelligence operations officer with 35 years of experience in global and also national security. In his think tank work, Lieutenant Colonel Shaffer is an advisor to senior members of the White House, the intelligence community, Pentagon, and also key members of Congress. He has detailed and also operational and also policy expertise regarding the full spectrum of strategic national security issues, from being a pioneer in cyber operations to being at the cutting edge of U.S. counterterrorism efforts and helping develop the use of weaponized technologies. Lieutenant Colonel Shaffer has conducted and also directed several key operational intelligence organizations that conducted what we would call compartmented or AKA black operations. These also include several special mission task forces, Stratus IV, that conducted direct support for the Department of Defense, compartmented activities for the Office of Secretary of Defense, OSD, Special Operations Command, SOCOM, Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, and also Big Army overall, focus on offensive intelligence operations. In addition to all that, Lieutenant Colonel Shaffer has also commanded the Field Operating Base, or FOB Alpha, a joint Defense Intelligence Agency, Central Intelligence Agency unit, conducting classified collection and also special operational support regarding terrorists just after the 9/11 attacks. Tony, it's a pleasure to have you here. I know you were scheduled to have you here yesterday. Unfortunately, with all the issues we had, I'm glad we were able to reschedule you for today's special discussion.
Well, thank you, Sargis. And all my favorite people are retired lieutenant colonels, so I appreciate being amongst good company here. So thank you.
No, Tony, it's wonderful to have you here. I wanted to start off, first of all, if possible, with a question that was initially asked of Claire Lopez, which I had a couple of weeks ago, a mutual friend of ours, and she's an advisory board member for the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement. And I asked her, I said that there's a lot of push for us to conduct possibly combat operations against Russia by various members of the media and also in senior staff, to include push possibly in some comments that were made by the chief of staff of the current White House. And I asked her, what do you think that is? And she really couldn't give me an answer. So I will start off with that question and ask, why do you think there's such a clamor for these type of operations against the Russians?
I think it's all to distract from the issues that we have to face and the Biden administration doesn't want to face. Let me be very clear on this. I'm not anti-war. I'm anti-stupid war. And at this point, there's no purpose to the Biden strategy. As a military man, Sargis, they want to deploy light infantry, the 82nd Airborne, to menace brigades of armor. It just doesn't work. And if you really wanted to do something regarding deterrence, you would have started 6 months ago. You would have started with a realistic format of large-scale troop movements to include armor brigades to Poland, to Latvia, to Lithuania, to basically all the Baltic states to make a point. We didn't do that, so what I see now is completely unserious. Putin is laughing at us, and so as far as I'm concerned, it's a distraction. I keep hearing all of this, we want to help Ukraine. You could have helped Ukraine by saying yes to them joining NATO. They didn't do that. So this is all drama. This is all distraction, and it's all playing Putin's game. I was asked the other day, well, what would you do if you were Blinken or Austin? For perish the thought. I would first off stop playing Putin's game. You've got to get onto your own strategic pace, your own strategic rhythm. You got to stop reacting, and that's what they're doing here. So the answer is they want to deploy troops to show that they're doing something, because they have so badly thought through, or did not think through, the steps necessary to establish a real strategy to counter Putin if that's what you wanted to do, or support Ukraine if that's what you really wanted to do. They've played into Putin's hands. They've not supported Ukraine. And that's why you see the mess you see now.
Yeah, I think for folks who may not understand, from our military perspective, it's very simple. If you want to do deterrence, you got to do it right away. So when you start,
Yes, you do.
when you start massing troops on the border, you have to be able to send those force structures that you said. I mean, if you had sent at that time possibly heavy armored brigades right into Ukraine, even if there was an attack by Putin against Ukraine, and that would mean there would have been an attack against NATO. And under Article 5, then the entire NATO force structure would be now arrayed against Putin. But unfortunately, when you don't do that and you kind of slow roll this process, you lost the edge on deterrence. And I think that's what has allowed Putin now to mass the type of force structures he has. And now, like you said, you can send 82nd, but 82nd is going to be rolled over by some of the heavy armored units that the Russians have. I do want to ask you a reality from us, because, we served in the 90s Army, 80s Army, which was arrayed to fight against a Russian threat. Most of our general officers may not be aware, as far as our audience are concerned, that most of our general officers really came into the fold after 9/11. So their focus hasn't been like we were fighting in the Wales Gap training at the National Training Center in order to be able to fight the Russians' onslaught into Europe. They're much more maybe urban focused, the fighters. Have we changed anything in the Army? Has the Army really been able to be ready for this type of a fight if it comes?
No, the Army, and that's a great point. One of my first overseas deployments was as part of Reforger 85, where I deployed to Germany as part of our Reforger stands for Return of Forces to Germany. And it was a heavy movement. I was part of 5th Corps, 165th Intelligence Battalion. I've got the coin around here somewhere. My first work chasing terrorists was during that time. And we were focused on, as you mentioned, the Fulda Gap, on creating credible deterrence to make sure the Russians understood there would be a massive penalty to pay should they take aggressive action. Biden has done none of that. And to your point, I don't think our generals understand how to do that. I'm friends and mentors with a number of Cold War generals. One of them is a former chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And they came up through the same military structure we did in the 80s and 90s. And I think they understand deterrence. They understand the use of heavy forces, basically to how to use heavy forces to deter the use of heavy forces. Yeah. And that's what they were able to do. And by the way, Putin was a lieutenant colonel at KGB. He gets this as well. So you're talking about someone like Putin who has basically taken what we knew the Soviets would do. He's recalculated for purposes of the 21st century, and he's doing the same thing we saw in the 21st century. We were dealing with them in the 80s. And so this has become problematic. And frankly, I think today's generals have been brought up with counterinsurgency. They're used to soft targets. They're not used to taking any. Look, when I was lieutenant, we were taught that your job as an officer was to take reasonable risk, was to actually do things. And you make mistakes doing that, but you learn by doing. Sargis, I think there's a zero fault mentality now. You make one mistake and your career is over. And so when you have that level of scrutiny, where to me, some of the best leadership comes from failing as a leader to learn and grow. If you can't grow, if you can't improve, if you can't understand strategy and apply that to the tactical level of warfare, you have a real problem. And so I don't know what Austin was recommending to him. And by the way, I know Lloyd Austin. I worked for Lloyd Austin when he was a brigadier general in Afghanistan. He was commander of CJTF 180. So I've worked with the man. And I don't know what Austin advised, but I can tell you his advice was probably not what we're talking about tonight. And sadly, even if he did give the right advice, it's very clear that President Biden did not take it.
I do know that your experience really, and you wrote a book on your experience with Afghanistan. Do you believe that what happened in Afghanistan with us really kind of living in a shamble debacle? And as you know, I mean, Tony, as of just yesterday, I was getting information on folks that we got to pull out of Afghanistan.
Right.
We're working on.
We're still working on it, right.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, it was sad about it that when you have the spokesman for the Department of State saying we don't know how many Americans are in Ukraine, and the assets that the State Department has are even limited now because of how far they've been expanded as to what they could do in Afghanistan, and even here in the U.S., they're actually being used somewhat to fly. Illegal immigrants are coming through to our southern border, back and forth in the country. There's nothing right now that is staged, at least at the State Department level, to be able to get Americans out of Ukraine if something happens. With that said, I guess my question would be, do you believe that Afghanistan and what we have even done in northern Iraq to an extent, or I should say Iraq, where the Iraqi government has wanted us out, the pullout out of Afghanistan, our footprint being marginalized in Iraq, that this will be the final strike? Do you think Putin might be looking at it and saying, you know what, if I could defeat the Americans here and they pull out, that they will lose strategic positioning possibly over the next few decades?
Oh, absolutely. Look, Putin, when asked what the greatest tragedy was of the 20th century, he said the fall of the Soviet Union. So he's made no denial of his desire to reestablish the Soviet empire. And what better way to do that than on the back of our defeat? That's what he's looking at here. I think he's always carried a bitterness. And he sees this as an opportunity. And then you combine that with what he observed in Afghanistan. Look, Operation Dark Heart's a book. It's right over my shoulder there. I was a part of the advisory team advising Mike Pompeo. I actually spoke to Mike. Mike and I didn't agree on everything, but we may have yelled at each other on the phone, but you agree to disagree at times. But with that said, the last chapter of my book talked about the negotiated path forward, and that's what they were going to do. And so the fact that Mike Pompeo with the Pakistanis had established a path forward, and then when Biden came in, he abandoned that. And between you and me, Sargis, what happened was once the Pakistanis saw weakness, they basically gave command and control support to the Taliban. That's why you saw that rapid advance. So the moment Biden broke the agreement, everything was off. So that weakness was observed by every other leader, Xi in China, Und in North Korea, the Iranians. So in my judgment, Biden has set up his own, what I would describe as an upcoming cascade of foreign policy failures. Afghanistan was the bellwether, as a canary in a coal mine. And I think Putin sees, again, we're still playing, not me, the Biden White House is still playing Putin's game. I would break it right now. I would say, I'm going to take NATO in a different direction. I'm going to immediately approve Finland and Norway's application to join. We're going to refocus and try to de-escalate a little bit, because NATO can coexist with a strong Russia. There are common enemies that we all know about that maybe we would be better off trying to refocus on those rather than being antagonistic. So nobody at the State Department or Department of Defense seems to have this level of understanding, Sargis, and it's really sad to see.
I mean, it's sad. In 2018, I was in Tampa, sitting there in a Special Operational Command discussion, and we had NATO representatives, and they were talking about how they were trying to restructure what the NATO, special ops would look like, and the conversation again went back with the older guys as to as we talked about how we used to defend against the Russians, and frankly, it doesn't seem like NATO even at that time had its structures ready to be able to do the type of fight that you and me had trained upon for so many years. And it was bothersome to me to think that we didn't understand. I mean, look, as we put this photo up, this is when the British were trying to resupply into Ukraine. They couldn't even fly over the German airspace
I know,
because
it's
Germany,
insane.
NATO partner, didn't allow them. Now,
Yeah.
under the 2018 discussion at SOCOM, the NATO representative had the German forces completely out of German territory in another location trying to counter against the Russians. And one of the generals did bring it up, I won't mention the names here, and said, are you sure that the Germans, if Germany is overrun, that those units are going to be in their gap, waiting in their sector and not going back to their main country, main homeland to be able to support what is happening within home nation? And really, there wasn't a solid answer by the NATO rep at that time. So I can just imagine with what is happening with the internal fights, between NATO commanders. I mean, the NATO admiral for the, I should say, for the Germans was recently fired because of his comments, or was asked to resign, for the better term, because of his comments about the relationship with Putin. It doesn't seem like there's a cohesive understanding of how to fight this fight. And based on what you're saying, if you tell me that we haven't even trained our army and the national training centers to be able to be structured, ready to fight this type of a fight, would it be safe to say that maybe Putin's move on a large war scale into Ukraine may be more of a possibility today?
I think, and by the way, the Germans depend on Russia for a great deal of energy. So the last thing the Germans are going to do is turn off their own energy in the middle of a winter. And Putin knows this. So to that point regarding force structure and where this all may go, I just don't believe for a minute that Putin feels the need to do anything except enjoy his time in the sun. That's what he's doing right now. Militarily, conditions are not quite right for armor. If Putin decides he's going to use armor, which I think he would in any measurable incursion, it's going to be within the next 2 to 3 weeks. Mid-February, I think everything is going to be sufficiently frozen to not see the armor bogged down if it's used in moss. You and I have seen armor. Man, that stuff tears up the ground, and you want to have good, solid frozen ground for that to move on the cross country. I learned that during Reforger, by the way, too, during snowstorms, watching our own M1s do that. With that said, I think it's very clear that Putin can do a number of things to take just part. Biden's kind of said, "Hey, if you take part of it, we don't care." So what are we going to do if Putin just decides I'm just going to take the eastern half and let Kiev kind of wither on the vine and then work politically, because they work the full spectrum of warfare, for 5-dimensional warfare. They're going to do cyber. They're going to do the political intrigue. Yeah. Heck, they've got intel right now very effective at what's going on where we do not. So we have a man playing chess in the form of Putin, playing against a guy who can barely figure out what the colors on the board are in the form of Biden. And I think it's an overmatch, and I think Putin's just going to run the board at this point. And I hate to say that, and because I'm not pro-Russian. Vladimir Putin's a thug, but I don't think anybody in the White House, in the Pentagon, in the State Department has been able to assess all aspects. Sargis, I spent a lot of time going through as a lieutenant something called intelligence preparation of the battle space, and you learn a great deal about how to assess threat, how to assess terrain, how to assess weakness and benefits of strength. And I just don't think anybody in any position of authority right now has that ability to have those critical thinking skills available to them.
No, it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. We kind of got ourselves into this position. I do want to give an opportunity. I'm going to listen to, we have a video on Anthony Blinken talking about the importance of Ukraine, and then I want to kind of dovetail off of what he's saying based on our earlier conversation as to, okay, how are we going to define this now for us? So sure. If you could go up that video.
If Russia invades and occupies Ukraine, what's next? Certainly, Russia's efforts to turn its neighbors into puppet states, to control their activities, to crack down on any spark of democratic expression will intensify. Once the principles of sovereignty and self-determination are thrown out, you revert to a world in which the rules we've shaped together over decades erode and then vanish. And that emboldens some governments to do whatever it takes to get whatever they want, even if that means shutting down another country's internet, cutting off heating oil in the dead of winter, or sending in tanks. All tactics Russia has used against other countries in recent years. That's why governments and citizens everywhere should care about what's happening in Ukraine. It may seem like a distant regional dispute or yet another example of Russian bullying, but at stake again are principles that have made the world safer and more stable for decades.
You know, Tony, when I listen to this, I think what's at stake from my perspective as a military guy, you losing Ukraine, you may not have any type of national assets that, or nothing, maybe you're not relying on their coal, on their energy or anything else that would help you, but you completely lose face amongst other national polities. And I'm not sure if I heard that in Antony Blinken's statement. If I'm wrong, please correct me. Maybe.
No, I don't know Blinken. I know some other folks who work for him. So this is my interpretation of that. First off, if he really believed what he's saying, he should have acted on the Budapest Accords, which was approved in December of '94, which said we would guarantee the territorial integrity of Ukraine. That was an agreement made. My friend Jim Woolsey, former director of CIA, was involved in that. It was done under the Clinton administration. They should have codified that, and they could have codified that by bringing NATO to the table, making Ukraine part of it. Article 5 then automatically becomes part of it. And then you either get Putin to commit or not commit, but you don't play this footsie game. The other thing fundamentally he doesn't understand is Russia. This is not about democracy. This is not about Russia being anti-democracy. They're anti anything that relates to what they perceive as their security. This goes back, Sargis, to before the 20th century, to the Russian czars. The czars have wanted this boundary of security. It's the Russian paranoia. If you don't understand that, then you can't understand anything else about the Soviet psychology. And their belief is what's ours is ours and what's yours is negotiable. If you don't understand the fundamentals of the Russian mentality, you certainly don't understand Putin, and you certainly are not in a position to be the Secretary of State negotiating with these folks. So what he said is just wrong. Now, you and I could maybe agree. I think we could agree that the prestige would be lost if Russia does something to take over Ukraine. It doesn't matter because we can believe that, but the people in charge have no clue. And my belief is they've negotiated themselves into this position of failure. It's a lose-lose. No matter what happens now, it's a lose. And that's why I said, you've got to get down and understand the psychology. You've got to deal with Putin as the thug he is. You can't be, 2 weeks before they're going to invade, you send the 82nd in and hope for the best. That's not a strategy. That's catastrophe. And that's where we're going. And Blinken has no clue.
Look, even at the lowest levels, when we were just lieutenants, you would have to see what the enemy's capability was. We ran red cells. I mean, imagine if suddenly Mexico decided to sign into the Warsaw Pact and then started having, Russian weapon systems being put into Mexico. Of course, U.S. will not be happy about it. And the fact that we did not have that understanding of the fact that Russia will not be happy if we start slow rolling things into Ukraine. Like you said, if we were serious, we should have done it then, as we mentioned earlier in our discussion. You know what? As soon as you saw forces capabilities being arrayed, especially the heavy armor, okay, you should have dropped your heavy forces directly into Ukraine and said, okay, I'm here, let's go. Come on, attack me. The second you attack me, Article 5, and now you get entire NATO basically coming down your throat. Now you're not there. You can't do that. No. You're sitting off of Ukraine. Is it possible, if we do go to war, that the current administration may have to be pushed into what we would call maybe not a hybrid war, but a total war, possibly? Do you think Putin would make that calculation against the U.S.?
Well, Putin has said, use the N word, the nuclear word, and I don't believe he's bluffing. I think one of the reasons, Sargis, we withdrew from the INF treaty, as you might recall, there was controversy about that when President Trump said, enough's enough. We already knew the Russians were building intermediate range nuclear missiles in violation of the treaty. So why would we not, especially when it comes to the other theater regarding China, where we may need those things eventually. So Putin said that. I think we need to be aware of that. But again, I would stop playing Putin's game. I would just say enough's enough. We need to establish a strategy and policy that benefits us and doesn't play into Putin's hand. And I would look at the other nations that Putin's worried about. Again, the Baltic states, Finland. Finland has issues. Finland has reason to worry. They've been invaded by the Russians before, so I think that they've got some issues. Norway's got some issues. So let's play our game. Let's figure out what we believe is in our interest, in NATO's interest, to basically rebuild that alliance. Because you and I both, I think our army is not ready to take on a heavy land force. NATO is not ready. So the first thing is get serious. First thing is the first rule of credible deterrence is having a credible deterrent. We don't have that. And so this hybrid idea, I don't think it's impossible, but it's impossible for this administration to execute that. Biden and the people he's picked has no capability to use multi-generational asymmetric warfare in response. So as much as I think you and I both know there's things we could do, they would be very effective. They have no understanding or willingness to do those things which would be necessary to push it back. So it's possible, but not likely.
Look, I think, as you said, Russia has made it very clear. I mean, after Crimea was taken under two administrations ago, under Obama. And today, if you look at the Russian maps, it's part of Russia. We can say that it's not, but it is. And they are now looking at possibly having a Duma vote on the fact that these areas are being contested, for the better term, or within Ukraine are going to be part of Russia. And if the Duma votes on it, which it probably will, I mean, he's already has his forces arrayed. He's already done what he needs to do diplomatically within the country. You could take a look at what, he's got his hands on the natural gas because we green-lighted the pipeline between Russia and Germany. Germany, we just had to, we showed that in January, they just closed three of their shut down three of their nuclear plants, and they're going to shut down the rest.
Huge mistakes. It's a huge mistake to do that.
So, I mean...
and remember, Sargis, remember, the people in charge today were the same ones who allowed Putin to do the advances. Why do you think the same people who worked for Obama and let 2014 happen, let Sevastopol go, why do you think they're going to behave any differently now? Putin knows this as well.
Let me ask you, Russia is part of the China Cooperation Organization, which is led by the Chinese Communist Party, China. Is it possible, from a strategic standpoint, do you think that our folks have at least looked and said, hey, maybe it's possible that if we do go to war with Russia, you're going to war with a nuclear power, Russia, which is going to be on the side of another nuclear power, which is China, which is going to be another nuclear nation, which is North Korea. And possibly now you're going to have to deal with what Iran is able to do. And some people are saying Iran may also already be a nuclear power, but we may not know it. So you're aligning that way against four major powers that can do a lot of damage to you strategically, not just in Europe, but also in Asia. Has that discussion, do you believe, taken place? Do you think they talk about these things within the current administration?
I think Russia and China and that whole there's a number of nations which are running their own game. The most significant of which outside of Russia are China and India. India and China have huge issues that are developing, and I don't believe that organization, as much as it puts on a happy face, is all that unified. Especially in Pakistan. Pakistan hates India. India hates Pakistan. I think India is a much more mature country. They've grown out of their adolescence. Pakistan is not. I know I'm going to get in trouble for that by my Pakistani friends, but it is what it is. At this point, I think it's very clear that the Indians are going to be challenging China. And this is where I think we should be investing a lot more of our time, especially since they are another democratic republic. And so I think we are much better off trying to focus on alliances within the context of what might make sense. Vietnam, the Philippines, South Korea, Japan are all going to be competing for the same resources in the Pacific Rim. Those are natural allies, which, again, I think we should be working very closely. There's already skirmishes between Vietnam and China. There's already a vulnerability that the Chinese recognize regarding India and their sea lines of communication relating to oil coming out of the Middle East. So we could act asymmetrically and be very effective in diminishing any number of adversaries with the political will to do it. I think there's capabilities that our adversaries kind of know about but don't understand. We actually know how to use them, but it's the political will that we lack. So as much as I think all those countries talk, I think there's a good deal of economic exchange. I don't think the Russians are ready to sign up to be part of a larger collective that would not put their security first, and that's the way I would approach it. So that's why I look at that.
Well, that's what we would call the worst case scenario, right? When we did the NDMP process. I do want to, as we're closing out the show, I do want to take a look at what the Pentagon spokesman recently said in a question and answer period where he was pushed by the reporters, and then kind of tie in what has the State Department stated, what the Pentagon is doing, and then kind of close out the show with taking your perspective on it. So if you could cue up that video, much appreciated.
We remain committed to the alliance. And we absolutely remain committed to bolstering the capabilities of NATO's eastern flank to the degree that they desire that extra support. And it's not about. Look, I don't think anybody wants to see another war on the European continent, and there's no reason why that has to occur. This can be solved very easily by the Russians de-escalating, by moving some of these forces away, which they haven't done. And so NATO, as a defensive alliance, and it is a defensive alliance, has a responsibility to its members to make sure that they're able to defend themselves if needed. And that's the spirit in which the Secretary has made these early heightened alert decisions. Jen?
Point of clarification, if NATO is a defensive alliance and these troops, if they are activated, are defensive and therefore frontline NATO states, how does this protect Ukraine? How does it stop Putin from going into Ukraine?
It's designed to reassure our NATO allies, Jen. It's designed to reassure our NATO allies. And we are taking,
How does it protect Ukraine?
Jen, it sends a very clear signal to Mr. Putin that we take our responsibilities to NATO seriously. And we are also working inside the international community to implement severe consequences for Mr. Putin if he were to go again into Ukraine. Largely those are of an economic consequences. So I get where your question is. I'm trying to be very clear. This gets to Barbara's question about what success looked like. We obviously don't want to see another incursion in Ukraine. We are using lots of levers to try to communicate why that would be a bad thing for Russia to do. But number two, and it's not an insignificant number two, is to make sure that NATO stays unified and that NATO, our allies, are able to defend themselves. And that is what this decision is all about. It's about putting these forces on a heightened alert in case NATO needs them.
I don't want to put you at odds with your friend here. That's not that it cue up that video.
I love watching John kind of flap in the wind. I actually was on the phone one time with Steve Ducey on Fox and Friends, feeding Steve questions to make John really dance a dance on the air. It was great. So I enjoy watching John. I mean, John, I've told John this. So look, John is talking out of his ass, to use parlance of the military. Where do I start? So first, they need to reverse it. It's like, no. as we talked about, Sagris, if you wanted to do the Ukraine thing, you should have put him in NATO. It's like, no, it's gone. You blew it. So your number one ain't going to happen. Just, kind of shove that aside. Number two should become number one. Strengthening NATO, if that's going to be your like, this is what you can do. This is what you can be credible in doing, and something you probably should do if you really want to stop further Russian incursions, if that's what you're really saying is true. So John is I think trying to put a very happy face on a very terrible situation of their own making, and at this point, there's no communication. John, if you watch this, John, listen to me. There's no communication you can send to them that's going to change the way they're going to do what they're going to do. Big hint. They don't care. So get that off the table. Do something that you can do and actually be effective in. Otherwise, you're just, to your point, Sagris, they're going to embarrass themselves. And that's what they're posturing to do right now, and it's sad to watch.
Is it safe to say that you're in a position now? Look, I've been to Vegas. I know the cards that they deal me sometimes, and that's the cards I got. And I don't think you could bluff in this case. But is it possible maybe to call Russia's bluff and say, okay, you know what? Go ahead and invade. And this is what's going to happen to you when you do. Besides, we're going to put the economic sanctions.
That's a better solution. Yeah. See, that's the thing. It's like, okay, dude. There's probably nothing we can do. As a matter of fact, I've done this in situations where if you don't, you can still bluff, but you got to have a credible bluff. So, and I don't want to give it away. We've done this against a warlord in Afghanistan, where basically he was going to throw Karzai out, and we had no cards. Like he outgunned us something like 10-1. So we basically said. Yeah, you can do the coup, but these are going to be the consequences, and we laid them out. And those consequences was, first off, there were credible consequences, and secondly, he knew we would do it. This is back when they believed us in early 2003, so it was a different atmosphere. But if you lay it out and say, yeah, these are the things that are going to happen, and this is going to be the bad things. So far, anything they've said. Sargis, nothing is rung Putin's bell. It's like they've already planned around this. They've already got all these other things to do. Their cyber forces are as good, if not better than ours in some cases. Unless you do lay out that saying, okay, you may get us here, but this is what's going to happen, and be very definitive and very clear about it. So.
It boggles my mind because you and me have learned this on field of battle. I mean, you get a thing straight, and it's like, okay, dude, you want to do it? Let's go. But here's what's going to happen to you. But I still don't understand why is that simple discussion not being able to be relayed to the decision maker in this case. Being executed through our systems. I mean, it's not that hard. Okay, you want to go take it, Putin. Here's what's going to happen to you, and then we'll call his bluff and see if he's going to go in.
You need it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I met Norman Schwarzkopf spoke at our graduation from spy school, and you need a Norman Schwarzkopf who both has the technical smarts to be able to say something and make it stick, and someone who's crazy enough to do something if he's told to do it. And so another Norm Schwarzkopf at this point would probably be very useful as commander of EUCOM. Otherwise, they have nothing at this point. So
let's take a look at the long term. As you said, the Russians were looking at that region going back to Tsar Alexander, and they're not going to let go of what they want. Georgia is not going to be part of NATO requirements. Ukraine's not going to be part of NATO. With that said, let's say Russia goes in and Russia conducts operations, and we are now forced to have to kind of fight some kind of a hybrid war. Do you think Putin has made calculations that even if I go in right now and I bring the Americans into this fight, that the Americans are not going to last past the 20-year period, just like they didn't last in Afghanistan? Do you think he's made that calculation and believes that in the long run, regardless if he beats us now or he beats us in 20 years, he still wins?
I don't think he thinks he can beat us long term. I think he recognizes, like many aggressors, that there's a certain point of critical mass where the American public gets behind something and we don't let go until it's done. We haven't had to do that for a long time, but I think that spirit is still there. And I don't, as much as I believe Mark Milley should resign and the Army's in bad shape, I don't think it would take. I was part of Reagan's recovery. One of my dear friends is Bud McFarland, the National Security Advisor to President Reagan during the 80s. And as a very young lieutenant, I admired how they were able to strategically think and get the momentum of the military going very quickly. I came up through that, and I respect that a lot. And I think it could be done again. So I don't think Putin thinks this is going to defeat us, but I think he knows it's going to buy him some time, resources, and prestige. Remember, this is about Putin. This is about Russia. Do they want to defeat us now? No, not really. It's not. That's not his. As a matter of fact, I don't even know if we have assets who's inside of his OODA loop. I love that term, OODA loop, to actually understand how he's thinking about things. But I believe I understand what he's thinking. He wants to reestablish influence, prestige, and empire. That's what he's doing. So he doesn't have to defeat us at this point. He just has to be successful. And I think that's what he's going for here. Yeah.
I mean, look, they made it very simple. Give us in writing that you will never have Ukraine as part of NATO. And I don't know where the United States is going to be able to reverse those demands that the Russians are put on the table. I mean, if you agree to any part of those demands, you lost. And now you lost Afghanistan, strike one. You lost in Iraq, strike two. I would say you lost in Horn of Africa, as you and me have talked about what I've done with the assessment. And then this would be the strike three, and it would really put the United States in a bad bind or position. But as you said, one of the hopes that we do have within at least the military structures, World War II, prior to it starting, our military was a very small military capability. And then, it was those 100,000 folks that trained millions of soldiers that were able to win the war against Nazi Germany.
I'm with you. As a matter of fact, look, I'm a big believer. I've studied the interwar years, Plan Orange, the Rainbow Plans. I've been trying to convince our military leaders to do that for the 21st century. I actually have Major General retired Tony Kukulu, a commandant of the War College. He tasked us to do it. He couldn't get the rest of the Army to go along, and he's on my board now, and I love him. But we need to be thinking the same way we did between World War I and World War II right now. And we need to be examining this. We're not going to have, it's not an analog. It's not one for one. But you've got to start thinking about what the next war is going to look like. Will it be a heavy land conflict? Will it be cyber heavy? Will it be nuclear? These are all questions that I think we need to be asking right now to strategically think and understand. And we don't have that right now, as far as I can tell, Sargis. Nobody is doing this, as far as I can see at this point.
Just one last question before I allow you to close this out. Our national training centers, are you getting a feeling that they're readjusting to be able to train to what we're going to be facing and the type of a war that Putin wants to fight? Are we at the hybrid type of a war? Are we at this large army? I mean, for God's sakes, I remember I did a corps attack when I was in Yakima Training Center. Going back now, my God, 30 years almost. I don't think we do any of that type of
no, we don't.
Training.
It's become social justice heavy. It's all about skin color, demographics, and how you feel. A quick note before we go. When I joined the Ohio Guard, I was in Officer Candidate School. You can see my helmet there from Officer Candidate School. I joined in '81. And I was mentored and supported by Sergeant Major Wendy Doherty. Sergeant Major Doherty, God rest his soul, was a private in Patton's army. He actually pissed off a bridge with Patton over the Rhine. That's the caliber of NCO I came up under. And man, you did not want to upset Sergeant Major Doherty. But he was the most well schooled. He was a warrant officer at one point. President Reagan wrote a letter for his retirement. Just a storied sergeant major. He's the kind of sergeant major you need to be supervising troops. Today, sergeant majors, with a handful of exceptions, and I know the exceptions are great men. They think like Sergeant Major Doherty. It's all about wearing high heels to make sure that you feel in unison with your female soldiers. It's all about making sure that you don't say or do anything that's going to be too hard, because you don't want to scare people away from the hard things they might have to do in combat. The days of scraping field ovens, as I did as a private first class, are gone. And they're not there. Those little things that they taught you how to do to understand what it would be like in combat conditions, it's just not there. And it's all because of the failure of leadership. And we have to find that leadership before it's too late. So I hate to paint such a grim picture, but I think that's one of our biggest challenges, is a lack of credible leadership within our own ranks at this point.
Yeah, it's a shame. I mean, one of my first NCOs in my first unit as a lieutenant was a Vietnam era NCO, and trust me, when that guy put his finger in your chest,
Oh yeah, Sergeant Denny, my drill sergeant. Oh yeah, no, I remember. If Denny's watching, I still remember that. Sergeant Denny. So yes, I do.
I still have pain right here from when.
Yeah, I know.
A finger could be that strong.
Sergeant First Class Denny, man, oh man, he was hell on wheels. I get it.
No, God bless him. Hey, look, it helped us survive on the field of battle.
Yeah.
So, we kind of learn our lessons. Look, I could have you here all day for our discussions. I do want to bring you back sometime in the future, talk about Afghanistan.
I would love to. I'd love to.
Have talked about what's happening there. Look, it's possible we may lose a large number of individuals in Afghanistan. Some of the numbers are looking into millions of losses coming by this May, because of the starvation and what is happening there, and that also reflects on us. But before we go on the Ukraine piece, I want to make sure that our audience know, if they want to learn more about you, they could go to the QR code on the bottom of the screen to the London Center for Policy Research. Tell us what else is on par for you right now over the next couple of days, what you're looking at doing, and then give us your final comments and closing comments on this Ukraine issue.
Sure, thanks. Well, look, London Center, we're a boutique think tank, according to the Daily Beast, in their hit piece on us a few years ago. And we focus primarily on threats that relate to strategic thinking. A lot of our senior fellows are focused on Gordon Chang. Everybody knows Gordon. Jim Woolsey, Bud McFarland. We do a number, Dr. Steve Hatfield, working the virology issue for us. We pride ourselves on trying to be factually correct, which makes us very unpopular. We try to stay away from political fights on both sides of the political aisle, but we do get into them. And we do things like Second Amendment. We're big supporters of the Second Amendment. We're doing stuff, like I mentioned, with Dr. Steve Hadfield on the COVID issue. Right now, we're doing a series of things looking at the woke military. We're doing things that relate to energy. I've got an environmental studies degree. Big hint, there's no climate crisis. It's all designed for the progressive side to fund their pet projects and fund businesses which support them and fund them back. We just got 6 inches of snow down here in North Carolina, first thing in 4 years. We're going to get some more this weekend, so don't think the planet's warming. So we do a spectrum of things that really, we believe, benefit the American public. We are a nonprofit. We do not take big corporation money. We try to be very, very agile and independent. So that's what we do. So people can check us out on our webpage that you've kindly put up for people to find. So.
No, it's wonderful. Look, from the Near East perspective, I set it up so we could teach basic link analysis using open source, so people, in the United States and around the world can actually understand how governments talk to each other using open press. So we try our best to kind of get people to think critically in these aspects. But Tony, it's a pleasure. I'm glad. Sometimes everything happens for a reason. I'm glad we had a better discussion today than what we could have had yesterday. And for our audiences, if you like the type of work we do have a 501c3 also, the United Australian Appeal. This year, the money that we are collecting, we're working on supporting the South Sudan Christians and also the Christians of Northern Iraq. Believe it or not, ISIS hasn't just manifested in Sudan itself, and the Israelis are with the Sudanese army fighting against them. They have also manifested themselves now in South Sudan, which is a security issue. And then also we've gotten the words already on the ground that you see ISIS command elements manifesting themselves in northern Iraq, which we're hoping that the Christians and the Syrian Christians of northern Iraq do not have to fight against that type of a menace. So if you like the type of work we do, just donate to the 501c3. It's tax deductible and help us support those Christian efforts. Tony, it's a pleasure having you here. Much appreciated. And I would be remiss to say that it's because of the cinema production and what they've been able to do is why we've been able to have wonderful guests like you on our show. And we will have you back again in the future. God bless you and thank you for everything you do.
God bless you. Sargis, thank you. God bless you. And I appreciate the serious questions and dialogue we've had tonight. So I hope to join you again soon.
God bless. And there's New Paradigms.